Advanced Residential Applications and Case Studies. Chapter 8, Cost and Income Approaches. Page 28, Income Approach. In all kinds of appraising, we have the three approaches to value at our disposal. In residential appraising, the usual approach to value by the income approach is gross rent multiplier, GRM analysis. However, in a garden variety residential appraisal, the gross rent multiplier is usually judged to not be applicable. In all the Fannie Mae / Freddie Mac forms for 1-unit residential properties, the gross rent multiplier is not required. It is, however, required in the appraisal of 2, 3, or 4 units on the Small Residential Income Property Appraisal Report, Form 1025. Remember, though, that the form does not dictate the appraisal process. If a particular type of analysis is necessary for credible assignment results, then that analysis must be undertaken. The gross rent multiplier approach may or may not be applicable to single-unit residential properties. It mainly depends upon the character of the market area and the prevailing attitude among buyers in that market area. If there are a substantial number of properties in that market area being purchased for investment purposes, then the approach would apply. If you are appraising a project of condominiums in a resort area where the majority of properties are rented, you would be remiss in not utilizing the GRM approach. If we are appraising a complex property with no reliable comparable sales, we might have to rule out the traditional sales comparison approach. If it is the type of property that we feel would not yield credible results through the use of the cost approach, we are down to our last gasp. If we can develop a reliable gross rent multiplier and make an estimate of market rents, then we may rely on the good old gross rent multiplier. Simply put, if a comparable property sold for $150,000 and was rented for $1,200 per month, the indicated gross rent multiplier is 125. You take the $150,000 price and then you divide it by the $1,200 rent. That's how you get that. If the subject property is rented for $1,400 per month, using a gross rent multiplier of 125 would provide an indication of value for the subject of $175,000. You take that $1,400 that the subject property was rented for, and you multiply it by the gross rent multiplier of 125. End of page. Page 29. Gross rent limitations. Through the use of gross rent multiplier analysis, the income approach may be applicable, but there are limitations on its usability. The technique can be applied only if there is a sufficient number of reliable sales and adequate rental data. The comparable sales utilized in a gross rent multiplier approach should be at least as good in all respects as the comparable sales utilized in the sales comparison approach. They should be similar in size, age, appeal, quality, condition, etc. Such comparables must have been rented at the time of sale. Further, we need to be able to ascertain the details of the rental contract. Also, in order to extract a reliable gross rent multiplier, there should be a larger quantity of such rented comparable sales. 3 is really not a sufficient number. We should have 6 or 8 or more to provide a really valid analysis. If you are in a market area in which there are rent controls, then you should not use the gross rent multiplier approach. The whole premise of the gross rent multiplier approach is that there is an ongoing relationship between rents and values. This further presumes that rents and values are free to fluctuate according to the dictates of the marketplace. Rent controls do not permit the unrestricted movement of one of the two vital ingredients. Rents are locked into place, many at artificial levels, for long periods of time. The relationships between the two factors are not allowed to follow normal market patterns, and the indicators become meaningless. In areas without rent controls, it usually develops that there is a somewhat constant ratio relationship. Let us just assume for the moment that single unit properties in an area typically sell at 120 times gross monthly rent. Over time, properties may appreciate or depreciate. If properties appreciate in value, then they should be able to command more rent. If properties were to appreciate 5% in a year, then rents most likely would tend to go up at the same rate. Therefore, this relationship between the two would remain the same, and properties would still sell at about 120 times monthly rent. Even in a normal free market, ratio relationships are not always constant. Prices are subject to more rapid fluctuations than rent. Also, many rents are locked in for a year or two through leases. It's only when a lease expires or a tenant moves out that the owner has an opportunity to raise the rent to the market level. However, over time, the rents and values will fall back into the same relationship and move along in lockstep. End of page.